All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another Advocacy Days where we're going to go over the out of home and in crisis for inappropriate placements in hospitals. And I'm going to start by sharing my own personal story and lived experience, and we'll go ahead and get that going. Just fair warning, this story is going to be an intense one, so I just figured I'd give you a heads up. All right. So my Uncle Johnny was born to Joyce and Lawrence Smith on July 1st, 1965, with his sisters and with his sisters, my two aunts and my mom. My uncle started showing signs of challenging behavior in his childhood, and it progressed up to adulthood. Then my grandparents passed away in a bad car accident in 1990. This left my family having to care for my Uncle Johnny. Mainly my uncle's care fell on my mom, who had me and my brother, and we both have disabilities as well. And with her being a full-time registered nurse and having her own kids with high support needs at that time, she wasn't able to completely care for him, as he would elope often, and she couldn't provide the proper supervision for him that he needed and supports that he needed. Unfortunately, this was during a time where services for families were a little bit more limited. Fast forward, my uncle started living in adult family homes, but would sadly be constantly kicked out one home to another due to his challenging behaviors that staff couldn't handle. He would bounce from home to home, and eventually he ended up inappropriately placed at Eastern State Hospital, where he was constantly restrained and heavily sedated, and he would be medicated to the point where my family grew concerned about his care. He wasn't himself. Later on, he ended up what Eastern said is having a fall, causing a lot of head trauma. However, his head trauma was so bad, my family said that he was hardly recognizable, but I'm going to spare the intense details. But the trauma in no way could have just been a fall, but that's what Eastern claimed. But my family had their suspicions and doubts otherwise. He was sent back to his previous adult home shortly after his injury. Then not long after, when my uncle was found by staff unresponsive in his room and sent to the ER, and then he passed away a week later on April 21st, 2001. I was only 9 years old at the time when he went home to be with the Lord. His life mattered, and he shouldn't be forgotten and left behind. Individuals with challenging behaviors like my uncle don't deserve to die isolated this way and have their lives left behind and forgotten. We talk about the success stories and those who don't, and then those who make it out of hospitals and institutions, but we also need to talk about those who don't make it out. I know it's hard to talk about this, but it's so important. This is why we continue to fight for change, so individuals no longer have to suffer and be stuck in hospitals where they're at risk of improper care and isolation. And that's about it. All right. All right. So that's my story. And make sure, and as some more people are entering in, make sure to select your language again at the bottom below, and then we'll move on to Justin Maxwell when he's ready to speak.
Thank you for sharing.
I'm first sorry to hear that. So this shouldn't have happened. Yeah, it's to me again.
Yeah, I'm so, I'm sorry.
So okay, hi, I'm Judge Match. Do you want me to start right now?
Yes, you can. If you're ready, you can start. We're 5 minutes ahead of schedule, so we're good to go if you're ready to share.
All right, I do that. Hi, I'm Justin Maxwell, and I'm it's doing it again, and I'm getting tired of it doing that. Jeez.
It's okay, Justin. Just go ahead and talk.
Okay. Anyways, I'm Justin Maxwell, and I'm wanted to talk about the fact that I have been in a hospital, and I've been in Fairfax, and I did not like it. And I didn't like the fact that they didn't really do anything for me. Because I was in there and there were bars on the doors. There was nobody was allowed to really do anything unless all they had to do was sit around and twiddle their thumbs, and they were staff wasn't really paying attention and had to focus on anybody whatsoever. They didn't have to focus on what was going on, and there was a lot of things going on in the middle of the night, and I was scared to death of what would happen to me or anybody else. And it was horrible. And yeah, and I didn't like it, and I'm not the only one in my family that's been in those hospitals either. I've had a great grandmother that died in one, and I've had and they, but I just wish that they would have in Fairfax not to put me there where there was a meant for people that were drug addicts or had very much had severe problems. They should have just put me in a little hospital bed with 24-hour watch and nurses keeping an eye on me so that I don't end up taking my own life. Yeah. Am I going too on? I'm sorry. And I just wish that it would not have happened. And that is why, in my opinion, if I'm saying this right, we all should just not have them, any of these institutions or hospitals open. And they need to be shut down. And there needs to be other programs and care for people that need it. And I really don't think that I don't think to putting someone in a facility where they cannot see their family, cannot talk to other people, cannot have any interactions or a way of life, it's not okay. And I believe that should have happened for me, and that should have happened for everyone else. Even if you are suicidal or you're a danger to yourself. And not to put yourself in people with IDD in a dangerous situation like they did with me. And that is all I'm going to say. If that's all I can say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Justin, for sharing such a personal and vulnerable story. And I'm sorry you went through all that as well. I'm
Yeah.
glad you're here to speak with us. And I really appreciate you sharing that. Does anyone have anything to say for Justin or any questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did a great job. Kyle
I
says,
tried.
yeah, you did a great job, and Katie and Jennifer say thank you, and Courtney, Tom says good job. And Sean says thank you for sharing. And but yeah, that was such a great story. Just thank you for sharing. Like I said, thank you for sharing your lived experience with us again. And I know sometimes it can be very hard, but it's so important. And we're 5 minutes ahead of schedule, so if anyone,
I just had, this is Kowski, me and
Okay.
Taylor. Sometimes I don't raise the hands when I should be, but you two both did a wonderful job, and especially when you're a 9-year-old kid that's went through traumatic thing about any relative, parents, relatives, about trying to help, trying to be special attention when there's having his person with disabilities. I know with my mom, she had to deal with me when I was born, but otherwise everything now is doing great. But and went through a lot of traumatic things, like when I was growing up, through grandparents, etc., all passing away when I was growing up. But otherwise, it's a traumatic. Sometimes when you get at a certain age, and somebody starts that you're really close to, and suddenly they do pass away, and they say, "Oh, I really was close because that person helped me grow up a little bit, or did things with me that I appreciated, especially at a young age." But otherwise, everything went great. And I thank you both for your wonderful stories.
thank you, Kyle. I really appreciate it. But also Malia said she can totally relate to the boredom you experienced, and she was in a children's home for a week and they had nothing for them to do, and it was torture. Wow, that's. And then Tammy said thank you for sharing, and then thank you, Sean. Yeah, I feel like the system kind of did fail us in that aspect, and we went through a lot of injustice that way, and we do need to do better in times of crisis and transition, especially for families. I know my mom's side of the family is the one that's where we get more so of the genetic for disabilities on our side of the family. But yeah, we couldn't get justice because the coroner at the time kind of screwed up, and so we couldn't get a proper autopsy. His death certificate just said traumatic brain injury. That was his cause of death. So there's not much my family could do, and which made it hard. But yeah, and as far as Justin, being a child, you should, especially nobody should be isolated and from just living life, especially when you're a kid, so no one deserves that. And is there anything else you'd like to say, Justin, before we move on?
Well, yes, I agree. It needs to stop. This whole entire people going in the hospitals, because honestly, it's not worth it. It's just gonna put people into a worse situation where they're just gonna end up hurt mentally, physically, or emotionally, and it needs to change. It's not okay.
I agree. Thank you, Justin. And Julie Clark shared as well that she was in many hospitals as well. Thank you. All right. We're now going to move on to a video from Seattle Times. And Jack Hayes is going to speak on when the home is the hospital.
Jack's been in the hospital for a year now. We've done all the behavioral therapy, and we've done all the medications, and we've done all the things that we're supposed to do, and it doesn't get better, it only gets worse. The people that have been through this all said the only way to get what you need is you have to take him to the ER. You can't bring him home, you have to leave him there. Like, you have to refuse to take him home, or they won't see that there's actually a problem. Every single day I had to refuse to take him home, and I had to say, no, he's a danger to himself and others. are going to Mary Bridge to see Jack, and it's right down the street here. When he was a baby, he hit his milestones and he even talked. At like 18 months, he probably had 50 words. And by 2, he stopped talking. And that's when we knew there was something going on. By the time he was 4 and diagnosed, at that point we had missed out on the opportunity for any early intervention that didn't just diagnose him as autistic, but diagnosed him as severely autistic. He's always kind of had that aggressive streak to him. Being nonverbal automatically disqualifies him from almost everything. Being aggressive disqualifies him for anything and everything. The need to have one-to-one support at all times disqualifies him from everything. We were denied from every single residential facility / school for severely autistic children nationwide. Like every single one. Nothing was available to him. And that's just kind of been a pattern throughout his life where there's just nothing available. In the last couple of years, like, he's broken my rib. He's stabbed me with a fork. He's bitten me to the point of breaking skin on multiple occasions. He's given me more concussions than I can count. I can't keep getting hurt. I can't watch Jack hurt himself. We're in crisis. We need help. He's in an 8x8 room with no windows. He lays in bed. He sleeps a lot. I think that boredom is a big factor in that. And I think depression is a big factor in that. He is highly medicated. And so it's like he's not really all the way there. He doesn't really want me to stay longer than 2 minutes anymore. I can't blame him. I mean, from his perspective, I'm the one that put him there. And I'd be mad at me too. It was good. They said that his tutors just left, but he was in a really good mood. He smiled at me a couple of times. He pulled me down onto his bed and gave me a really big hug, and then he aggressively waved at me to leave. But he was definitely in a much better mood than I've seen in the last couple of weeks. We have explored every option possible. Because his needs are so great, there isn't anything. It's important for people to understand that this is happening and that it's happening again and again. Because nobody really realizes it. They just assume, like, oh, we're in Washington, we take care of people. No, we don't. We need to, but we don't.
Right. Oh, I'm speechless. Our next video is gonna be Austin Jenkins on the mental health patients stuck in Washington hospitals. It's a PBS video interview. So we got a heavy agenda today with lots of impactful stories and videos to share. So move on to that. All right.
Hi, I'm Scott Leadingham. Thanks for joining us here in the unique Northwest. Today we are joined by Austin Jenkins, Olympia correspondent. Thanks for joining us today, Austin.
Thanks for having me.
Austin has been doing a series of reports of late on the issue of developmental disabilities and the service delivery that those individuals receive in the state of Washington. So, Austin, we're going to dive right into that topic today. What would you say about the delivery of developmental disability services in this state? Let's broadly sum it up.
Well, generally and broadly, there's about 35,000 people who are being served by the state's Developmental Disabilities Administration. And then there are another 13,000 people who are DDA eligible, but they're not being served. And so we took a look at that unmet need and highlighted it, something that hasn't been done by a reporter in this state in about 6 years. But since then, what's happened is that the state legislature put some money towards buying down that unmet need, if you will, and actually eliminated the wait list for at least one of what are called the Medicaid waiver programs that individuals would be eligible for. What's happened since then, though, is there are now people once again waiting because there's a cap or a limit on these waivers and these baskets of services. At the same time, what we're finding out is not much is known about these 13,000 people. There are no case managers tracking them. There used to be, but those positions were cut during the Great Recession. So we don't know how many of them want services but haven't formally asked for them, how many would actually qualify. The other thing that we've learned is that the DD services in this state, developmental disability services, they don't grow with the population. They're not part of what they call the caseload forecast. So the budget is the budget, and the people who run that administration are saying that the growth is like 10% a year in people who are eligible, but the budget's not growing 10%.
Developmental Disabilities Administration, or DDA, as you've said, probably a state agency I'm willing to guess that a lot of people have never heard of or aren't really very familiar with. Can you just tell us a little bit about what exactly they are charged with doing, and in your reporting, if you found out if there are some holes in the supposed delivery of those services?
Sure. So DDA is a part of the Department of Social and Health Services, and it does a bunch of things. It's running the state's residential habilitation centers, the RHCs. And, over the decades, the state of Washington, like most states, has really moved away from institutionalizing people. We've downsized those RHCs, although unlike other states, we have not closed all of our RHCs. There are still about 600 people who are institutionalized in this state. So where do these people go if they're not in an institution? They go into the community. And so what the effort has been is to try to build some capacity in the community, and a person might be cared for by their own family members and be getting some services in the home. They might be in what's called a supported living environment where they have their own apartment or house, maybe with a couple of roommates who also are on the DDA caseload, and they have providers coming in, state paid providers through a contractor coming in to give them care, oftentimes 24/7. Some of the problems that have been identified, though, are, first off, these services in the community are not an entitlement. There are caps and limits, and as we've identified, the budget's not growing to keep up with the pace of growth in this community. But also there are tremendous workforce issues, which we're seeing across the healthcare industry, but real problems recruiting and retaining people to care for these individuals in the community. And with turnover come problems, there come violations, issues with the quality of care, and it makes it all the harder to place people when you've got high turnover. And then the really big issue, and what takes up a lot of DDA's time, is trying to manage the cases of those most complex patients. And that's really where we were focused in a lot of this reporting, is the individual who has co-occurring behavioral health needs, behaviors that can be violent at times. And those folks can be really, really difficult to place in the community. Oftentimes what happens is their caregivers, whether it's a family member or a paid agency, literally just drop them off at the ER and say, we can't handle this individual anymore. We're dropping them off at the hospital. It's somebody else's problem. And that can begin a real cascading series of events that can end up very badly for the person.
You recently posed this question in a headline and in a story that you wrote about whether disability support services for this population and these people is a constitutional right in the state of Washington. So I'll just throw it out there. Is it a constitutional right?
It's an interesting question because usually when there are lawsuits over access to services for people with developmental disabilities, or really people who are disabled generally, those lawsuits have to do with federal law. So an advocacy group will sue, for instance, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, a federal law. However, the Washington state constitution, first off, we know that the state constitution is very clear, very explicit, that the paramount duty of the state is to amply fund public schools. And there was a lawsuit, the McCleary lawsuit, that went on for a decade or more over that issue. There are lesser known articles in the Constitution that have to do with other provisioning other services. And Article 13 of the state constitution talks about the state providing institutions for children who are deaf and blind, for the mentally ill, and for people with developmental disabilities. And some constitutional law experts and appellate level lawyers have looked at this and said, you know, institutions could be defined broadly. It doesn't have to mean a state psychiatric hospital or a residential rehabilitation center. And furthermore, this seems to impose an entitlement, if not a right, bestow an entitlement, if not a right, upon individuals with mental health needs, with developmental disabilities. And then the question becomes, is the state living up to Article 13? It really hasn't been tested in modern times, and it's not quite as ironclad in the wording as Article 9, which is the paramount duty education clause. Nonetheless, these appellate level lawyers are intrigued, and they think there might be an avenue for litigation to test that question. Are these services a constitutional right in the state?
Your reporting of late has highlighted an issue that I think people might be sort of tangentially aware of, but not really aware fully of how prominent it could be and is in the state of Washington and elsewhere. And that is the idea of people who are essentially stuck in hospitals because of their a mental illness or developmental disability, but they don't actually have any medical need to be in those medical hospitals. It's not a psychiatric hospital. And your reporting highlighted the family and the plight of Christopher Davis in Spokane and Sacred Heart Hospital. Tell us a little bit more about what they've gone through.
So we first met Christopher Davis and his family when he was in a supported living environment, living in an apartment, and that provider was shut down by the state, and he needed to find a new provider. I checked back in with the family a couple of months ago, and they told me that Christopher was in the hospital at Sacred Heart in Spokane and had been since December. So this had been going on for 8 months. He'd been brought to the hospital because of some behavior issues. He'd been cleared for discharge, but then there was nowhere in the community to place him. And his mother, who is his guardian and a fierce advocate for him, was not comfortable with him being sent to another community. So he remained in the hospital, but it really highlighted a recurring issue, which is that for these more complex clients, finding an appropriate placement in their home community can be a real challenge, and the result can be that somebody remains stuck in the hospital for months and months and months.
You also highlighted the issue of court fines and contempt orders racking up against the state of Washington as a result of all of these things you've been reporting on. And you talked about that by way of a man named Fred Ackerman and his family and his sister Dawn. Tell us a little bit more about what's happened with them and why the state is racking up fines and contempt orders.
Yeah, this is where these systems start to get kind of complicated and overlay each other. Big picture step back, there are people who are stuck in the hospital who don't have developmental disabilities. In fact, from what we've been able to discern talking to the Hospital Association, most of the people stuck in a community hospital with nowhere to go are people with dementia, so probably older and need dementia care, and that's very hard to find, especially if you're on Medicaid. When you start looking at subsets of those people, there are people with developmental disabilities. There's another subset of people who are stuck in community hospitals, sometimes in a regular hospital bed and sometimes in a psychiatric ward. And they have been found to be so debilitated that they meet the criteria for involuntary treatment. And then they are needing a bed in a state hospital. That would either be Western State Hospital or Eastern State Hospital. And that's the case you're talking about, where this individual was here at a hospital in Olympia, where I am. He was very difficult to manage. And the hospital finally went to court to say to the state, you have to take him off of our hands. You need to get him a bed at Western State Hospital. And when that didn't immediately happen, the community hospital went back to court and asked the judge to find the state in contempt. And then when contempt was found and a bed was still not made available, the hospital went back and asked for sanctions to be imposed. So that is definitely something, a trend to watch. It all goes back to this issue of people being stuck in the hospital and the lack of available state psychiatric beds.
It's been an incredible amount of reporting. I hope you get some sleep after all this or take a little bit of a vacation. And we thank you for sharing it with us today, Austin. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. You're welcome.
Hey, Diana, we're about a minute behind on schedule. Do you want me to answer questions right now or keep going? Or there are more comments, but.
Let's let Noah go ahead and go, and then we can take questions after him.
All right, we're gonna let Noah and Leah talk about their report on the I Want to Go Home. And it's through the Washington State Developmental Disabilities Ombuds. So let's welcome them.
Hello, this is Noah Seidel from the Office of Developmental Disability Ombuds, and I have Lee Walters with me, and I'm going to have Lee will start, and we have a PowerPoint we'll share while we talk about the I Want to Go Home report.
I can't share my screen, Taylor. I can always just talk off the cuff, but
Okay, I just made it so you can share.
oh, bless, thank you. Okay. Alrighty. Let me make sure this works. Okay, can people see that all right? Okay. So I'm Lee Walters. My gender pronouns are they, them, theirs. I work for the Office of Developmental Disabilities Ombuds. I'm sure you already know Noah, my coworker. And so then today we're going to talk a little bit about a report that we published in September 2022 called I Want to Go Home, Reevaluating DDA's Children's Services to Prevent Hospitalization and Out-of-State Placement. So this is the little preview of where we're going today. I'm going to give like a very brief background on the report. And then I want to offer maybe a different framing that some of the other people who've spoken already today haven't offered, and then talk a little bit about the type of advocacy that we do around this issue. So in September 2022, I Want to Go Home was published, and for the report, I interviewed 5 families from across Washington and youth specifically who were stuck in the hospital or were sent to an out-of-state placement. And so sort of the very, very brief summary is that youth who can't get the services they need at home are getting stuck in hospitals or being sent to out-of-state placements that separate them from their families and their communities. And so I'm sure a lot of you have heard, me or Noah talk about the report before, or even, maybe read the report. And so I know today we've already heard like a lot of first person perspectives. And so I could tell you about the report, or you could, listen to the people that talked before me who can tell you about, what their experiences are better than me just repeating what I wrote about. So what I thought that I can bring to the table, maybe that other people weren't going to talk about, is maybe a different framing or perspective on this issue and why we chose to write a report on this topic. So here's this quote. Their life is disintegrating and nobody seems to care. And that quote was one of the from an interview that I did with a family member of a kid named Max, that's a pseudonym, who was stuck in the hospital. And this quote was given in the context of right after he was arrested. And I think what's notable here is that Max was the only person of color that we interviewed for the report, but he was also the only person arrested, despite all of the other, youth in the report having frequent police interactions. As I think a lot of us know, police interactions are really risky for disabled folks and very dangerous sometimes. And so I want to offer a more political understanding of trauma from one of this book that I really like called The Politics of Trauma by Stacey Haynes. And she says that trauma is an experience, series of experiences and or impacts from social conditions that break or betray our inherent need for safety, belonging, and dignity. And I think what's really important about this framing is that it talks about trauma as a community problem instead of something that just an individual experiences. And so we can see, here at the bottom, one individual may, experience a trauma, but that can have a ripple effect across their whole, across society. So it affects, the people closest to them, their families, and other people they're close to, their friends. It affects their community. It affects how institutions are run, and it finally, affects the social norms and historical context, which is how we get, generational trauma. And so in this case, one example would be, policy that doesn't allow for youth to get their needs met. Even if, people do want to help systemically, those resources aren't always necessarily there. And so this would be an example of how systemic trauma occurs. So systemic trauma is when, those violations or, dignity betraying things happen to groups of people over a long period of time. And so finally, what I really want to say is that violations that occur frequently and across many communities show us that there's something in the social and economic fabric that allows for this to keep happening. And so that sort of brings us to, the work that Noah and I do when we get complaints from people about their services. And it's how, we learn about systemic problems through individual complaints, and some ways that we help people, when they're stuck in the hospital, we can, go to your meetings. So there's someone there who's separate from the service system on your side. We have our access authority, so we can talk to DDA staff. If you'd like us to, we can, request records and visit people where you are. We can come visit you in the hospital. We can help, explain the bureaucracy in the service system, because the service system isn't accessible. So a lot of times what we do is help, explain it accessibly. We can help take the pressure off of you and put the pressure back on the service system. And I said this to Noah yesterday, and I'm going to say it again. We can be annoying, so you don't have to, right? If there's a question that you don't feel comfortable asking, and we can keep asking that question until it gets answered. We also know magic words. So we know how to ask for what you want in the right way that the service system will listen. We also have big picture knowledge. So we talk to people at all levels of DDA, so we know what's going on at a higher level. And so then lastly, when you get out of the hospital, we can help you wherever you're at to make sure you're still doing okay. And I think one thing that's really important here is what we're coming up against, especially with people being stuck in the hospital, is that when the problem is systemic, that's not just going to be resolved through individual advocacy, because the problem is not individual, it's a community problem. And so we need, systemic work to solve the issue, which I think brings us to Noah and talking about some legislative advocacy.
Yeah, thank you, Lee. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some legislative advocacy, and I know Diana always does a great job going through the bills of interest. So I'm just going to highlight a few bills that are really helping with this situation. Like as Lee mentioned, when we come in as advocates, and I know there's other advocates on this call, like we don't have that magic wand to fix the solution or quickly get somebody out of the hospital. There's people who are in hospitals for months and even years, like we saw in Jack's video. So we know that there needs to be some systemic changes in our society, in our bills, in our funds that our government provides to fix these resources and get people what they need in the communities that they want to live in. So we can go to some slides. So one bill that we're tracking is House Bill 1188. And this bill is around providing DDA waiver services for people, for youth who are also getting child welfare services. So that could be like foster kids or people who are getting DCYF services. So one thing that we're seeing is that there is a gap, and because DDA can't provide services while youth are getting other services through DCYF. So this bill would be helpful because then a person can get services, DDA services, while they're getting DCYF services. It also does caseload forecasting for this population because we see youth who are in the welfare system who then need to transition into our DDA services. And that when there's a gap in that, we're seeing youth either be homeless or go to the hospital while their services are getting figured out, while they're changing from one system to another, one bureaucracy to another. So this is one bill that we are following and supporting. Another bill I want to talk about is House Bill 1580. So one thing that I'm involved in is the Children's Youth Behavioral Health Work Group. So after we published the report, we brought it to that work group. We presented, and we also worked with Seattle Children's Hospital because they have an influx of youth who don't need to be in their hospital, who are there. And we worked together on some solutions. And one of them requires the governor's office to maintain a multi-system care coordinator to serve as state lead on addressing complex cases and children in crisis. So one thing that we're seeing is that when a children is in the hospital or in crisis, they might be receiving multiple services. The healthcare authority is involved, DDA is involved, DCYF might be involved, and there's not one person that can really kind of say, I'm going to help figure out all of your resources and lead these meetings and facilitate the meetings. At different times, it's a different person. So having care coordination to look at these issues, help the families and the individual know what's available, help navigate this complex system will be really helpful. And the fact that it will be in the governor's office is also helpful because then the governor will know where the gaps are. And part of this legislation is also putting out a report about the children in crisis and what we need to do to fix this system. And then another bill that will look at this problem is Senate Bill 5103, and this directs the Healthcare Authority and DSHS to provide payments to hospital for any part of Apple Health patient stay that meet certain qualifications. So this would be $700 a day that the state would be paying for the hospitals to help alleviate some of this issue. One thing that we're hearing from hospitals is that these folks don't need to be there, so they're not getting paid to provide care for them. And that's causing issues within the hospital. And it also sadly hurts the relationship between healthcare authority, DSHS, and the hospital. They're using some of the meeting time to talk about payments and funds and how this is affecting the hospital. And if we can move away from that and really focus on the individual and what they need, hopefully that will help with the relationships between hospitals and the state, and also keep our focus on getting the individual what they need and getting them out back into the community, getting them the services they need, and not talking about payments during these team meetings. So those are just a few bills. I know Diana will cover some more bills, but I just want to highlight those three. And we can provide these slides, and we put together our contact information, and we can also take some questions if there's time available.
Thank you, Noah. Do you think you could put some of that information in the chat or the link to the slides or the contact information? I know people are wanting a copy of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll leave a link and then I'll put together an email with some information.
Awesome, thank you. It's always, I always enjoy reading your guys' report. It's very good and very knowledgeable.
Thank you.
All right, we are at 10:45. Lots of comments and questions, but we're at 10:46 now, so we're a little bit behind. Do you still want me to answer questions, Diana? Or answer some of them or address some of them? I just want to make sure I'm being respectful.
Yeah, go ahead and take a couple minutes to do that. And
Okay. I'm just not sure if I'm going to be able to get to all of them in a timely manner, but yeah, Katrina Davis provided some good info in the chat, as Diana put in some of the videos. But yeah, lots of passion regarding about how there's these hospitals, but but after that, where do we go? There's still not the services and the trained licensed care providers that are able to address challenging behaviors. And I think I pretty much summarized what everyone said in the chat. So is that good, Diana?
yes, and the chat will be available on our website afterwards with the video.
Okay, sorry, everybody. I try to summarize a little bit of what everyone said so we can move forward. But thank you for keeping the chat busy, especially Katrina putting all these good questions in there and info, and it's really appreciated. And also, yeah, we'll get going, and we're gonna have a Katie Omri from SIBS from Washington Autism Alliance talk about SIBS waivers.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. So my name's Katie Omri. I work for Washington Autism Alliance, but I'm kind of predominantly here as mom. I have 3 kids. My youngest is 18, level 3 autism, severe challenging behaviors, wickedly, fantastically manipulative and charming, and manages to get what he wants with very few words because he communicates in so many other ways. And our story is really similar to a lot of people's stories, other than we had a lifeline thrown to us at just the right time. Miles was diagnosed with autism at 3. He was delayed the whole time. Prior to that, he'd been getting therapies and treatments. And as the youngest brother, you know, the older siblings just became carpooled to various therapies and peer players along the way. Miles's autism has manifested in a couple things that no matter how much OTPT speech we were getting, he wasn't able to stay regulated. And these, he just looked like he wanted to unzip his own body and flee. He was very uncomfortable in where he was, who he was. And so he had his repetitive stims and things that made the world tolerable to him. And then as he got older, we started to watch, 6, 7, 8. He was, wonderful in preschool when he wasn't really struggling and having a fit and having to be removed from the classroom. He was fantastically loved by his first grade teacher until, he would have, we went in and saw that there was a mat in the corner of the classroom because when he was really, really upset, she knew he didn't want to be isolated, but she needed to keep him safe. So she let him lay on the mat and thrash because he needed to do that. His aggression has always been internal. He had for a long time really wicked self-injurious behaviors. banging his head, hitting his head. If you've ever seen your child so uncomfortable that they are harming themselves multiple times a day, and they're getting big enough that you can't restrain them, and you've been thrown down the stairs several times, not because they want to, and you've gotten black eyes and, you know, noses. The times I've been headbutted, bruises, dislocations. This from a baby boy who has adored my husband and I and his siblings always. These are not behaviors that have intent. These are symptoms of what he has. We applied for DDA when he was 4, and we were told, congratulations, your son is disabled, and congratulations, you make too much money, and so you're on our no paid services. And that was when you had a case manager. I called the case manager and I said, so what does this mean? And he said, well, he's in the system. And I said, well, what does this mean? Can we, you know, I didn't know anything about services. What can we get? And he goes, well, what do you expect? You guys make too much money. And that was the last interaction I had with that case manager before those case managers were taken off and there was nobody. We testified on the no paid services bill so that there are case managers now that listen, because we had a 4-year period after he continued to escalate with his behaviors. He was regressing. He was making academic progress. He was doing all these things, and yet his behaviors weren't improving. There was a thing we were missing. We didn't understand it. I couldn't parent him out of it any better than I can parent out of my, the bipolar 1 out of my daughter. I couldn't parent my son and his behaviors out of what he has any more than I can parent my niece's peanut allergy. She required, you know, there was something there that we were missing, supports he needed, something we didn't get. We finally had, as most disabled parents do, we had a family who was also had a disabled daughter, because as a tribe, we all we take care of each other. And she said, don't you know there's these waivers? I just learned about them. I spent 4 years getting my son a spot on the SIBS waiver, calling every day for like probably the last year before he got it, knowing that if I had shift work, if I worked, you know, if I worked nights, if I did anything, I wouldn't have been able to do that. If I didn't speak English, I wouldn't be able to do that. If I didn't have a friend who was a parent of a disabled child, I wouldn't be able to do that. If I didn't work for in-birth healthcare at that point for 10 years, I wouldn't know how to do that. If I didn't have disabled sibling that I watched my mom advocate, I wouldn't know how to do that. I have a master's degree. I wouldn't know how to do that if I didn't know how to navigate the ridiculous systems that are in place and currently just not providing services, but they're in place and on paper. Boy, we're all really, you know, winning the lottery with what we have going on for services. Sorry. So we finally got the SIBS program, on the SIBS program. And I say our family unicorn walked in the door and did a behavioral assessment. Our behavioral provider walked in and did a behavioral assessment. And it was the first time in our lives that we saw somebody look at Miles and see who he was and see what those behaviors meant. Not, oh, he's raging. Oh, like it was like, here's your son. And I see these pieces of brilliance, and I see this fun sense of humor, and I see all these abilities. And if we could just get these behaviors under control so that he's not trapped by them, we're going to see that more, and others will see that more. So he started doing positive behavior support in the community, which is the thing I advocate so much for. This was a boy that he wouldn't leave the house without taking down whoever it was trying to put him in the car. He couldn't hear running water in a house without banging his head against the wall. He couldn't hear music. He couldn't hear the train. Sound stuff, sensory stuff. He couldn't hear forks on a plate. He could not eat in the same room with us. He had to eat somewhere else with headphones. in order to not injure himself while he was eating. This last fall, after 10 years of positive behavior support therapy in the community, he plays on the unified basketball team, but he cannot be bothered to do any sort of physical activity. So his job is to sit and eat snacks and cheer. And he used to not be able to go into gyms of any kind because the acoustics and the bells and the whistles and the buzzers in the gym made him hit his head on the gym floor so badly that we never tried that one again. So we never watched our older son's basketball games together. Dad and I split up for everything. One to keep Miles safe and one to go support our other kids. Sorry, I'm rambling now just because I feel like I've just told this story so many times. But in the fall, he in the gym in his high school gym, he was crowned homecoming royalty for his high school. This meant that he has had his behaviors under control long enough for peers to see him as fun and not scary. Teachers to know how to teach him without being afraid of, being so concentrated on, is his arm going to come up? Do I have to guard while I'm helping him with his math? He's in drama, and he can do that because he can be trusted not to have severe challenging behaviors, which are absolutely, again, this is a symptom of his dysregulation. It's his communication that things are not well with me. He has gotten treatment through behavior therapy that has helped him manage and cope and has helped him understand that the world isn't scary and that he can do it and that he wants to do it. So he doesn't do assemblies because they can be really sensory hard for him. He knew, with his cognitive delays and being partially verbal, he knew that this assembly was celebrating the fact that he was important and seen and celebrated. And he put his headphones on and he went and he sat and he wanted to sit with the other kids. Even though it was a pretty good idea, he was going to have to bail, maybe, if he got overwhelmed. He sat through, he clapped at all the right places. He laughed. He does his laugh when he hears people laugh. He goes, ah, he's just like, me too, I found that funny. He left partway through because he was overwhelmed. They went out to check on him and he was practicing his breathing techniques in the hallway outside the gym. He wanted to get back in there. We've never gone back in. He's never worked to self-regulate. And he worked that hard to go back in because he knew he was being celebrated. I hear all these stories at WA. I hear stories. I do 5 intakes a day of families that are at the other end, families like Taylor's uncle, families like Jack in that video, families like, I see parents on here that I know their stories, and that could be us. I've been 3 months in a mental health institution for mental health. The difference was I could participate in the therapies there. I could participate in talk therapy. I knew cognitively how to participate in the wellness and the program I was working through. Miles, with his severe challenging behaviors, the only thing that we have found that has worked for him is behavior therapy. That is also the one thing that has been removed now from the SIBS program and every other waiver. That now, when I used to say SIBS is a program that saved our family, it saved our kid, it saved our marriage, it saved my life. It's gutted. It's fully gutted. There is nothing in it. He can go and do horse therapy. We don't have horse therapists near us. He can do music therapy, which is great, except for both of his older siblings are musicians, and they're as close to a music therapist as we have as a provider that's around us. We get respite care, we get personal care. We're not this isn't, I was talking to a parent the other day. I'll stop soon because I see this. I was also one of several families that when they were starting to take away positive behavior support therapy from the waivers, I worked for a year making the healthcare authority and DDA talk to each other. I mean, I can't even tell you how many phone calls, how many letters, how many emails. I talked to the ombuds, I talked to the healthcare authority, all levels. There were meetings that were happening weekly. What are we going to do with these kids that are coming over to the state plan? My son has never once been past the fill out your information online about your kid at that process to get an ABA therapist to replace what he lost. He is starting to regress. He's starting to become the kid that we used to see trapped. He's 18. He's about to go off the cliff of services that we all know. Once school ends and they're gone, they graduate, there is nothing. He cannot participate in supported employment with the supports that he needs. His behavior therapist is the one-on-one thing that he needs. Like if he had a vision problem and he needed a cane or a seeing eye dog or a guide, his behavior therapist is the one-on-one support and accommodation that he needs to access the community, to do well, to participate in the world. And we can't get that. Sometimes it's a philosophical difference. Well, I didn't like ABA and ABA was bad. And all of us parents, I respect every single story I hear of every family that has had trauma, institutionalized trauma, provider trauma. I don't disbelieve a word, but I can't get anyone to believe our story that it worked. I can't get anyone to believe our story that we had a piece that worked. The system made a change and affected 5 of us in our family. My husband's a firefighter. He now has to take off work periodically if I'm taxed, or sometimes we choose which one of us is going to work that day, who has sick leave, what can we afford, because Miles is getting harder again. And I just need systems to make sense. I need us to get on the same page. I need us to stop deciding that we're gonna gravel to, just over the scraps that disabled kids get. I feel like my last thing I'll say, I feel like my older 2 were born, they are, they're considered gifted. They are, all 3 of my children are beautiful inside and out. My other 2 have physical and cognitive capabilities that allow them to be seen as worth something in our society. My youngest son, who has many of those, it's demonstrated how much the world thinks he's worth when they won't pay his caregivers, when they can't come up with a creative solution to figure out who's going to pay for what, when we don't get a phone call back, when we're seeing as parents that don't care, when we don't fully fund caseload forecasting, when we don't fully fund programs and we have caps on things. What you're telling me is the value of my son is low and it's finite. And I am tired of it. And I'm tired of watching other families put in the same situation, because we have an entire population of beautiful, brilliant, worthwhile, amazing people in our society that we ignore, or we think we're going to give them a little bit and that's going to be enough, and it's not. So yeah, we're a SIBS case. We're a success story, and we will soon be a SIBS case failure because of how it's changed, how the programs are gutted, and that most of it is over disputes that are philosophical disputes about, well, should we do this or this? And I'm tired of it. Ask the parents, they'll tell you exactly what they need. I'll stop now. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. That was very powerful. I could feel it the entire time you spoke. Let's connect later, actually. All right. Wow. So we're gonna have a Messeret, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, speak next. She's a mom of a child sent to Heart Spring. And we're just gonna watch this another moving video. Thank you again, Katie.
Okay. Thank you so much. I'm already emotional with hearing this old story from the family. Thank you everyone for advocating for our kids. First of all, this opportunity is very important for all of us. My name is Masara Taile. I am a mother of 2 boys. My oldest child, Lul, is diagnosed with autism, a very serious developmental disorder that impair his ability to communicate. I think Justin's story, which was told before in the beginning, that's exactly Lul's story. Lul was staying in PBMU department more than 8 months, stuck in the hospital. We don't know where to take him. I was saying no, because he's not safe to stay home. I'm not gonna repeat because everything is my story. Unfortunately, I believe autism is not enough profile for my son. Under the definition of autism, my son's struggle is not enough described. Lul is 15 years old child. Currently, he is in Heart Spring Residential School in Kansas, Wichita, since October 19, 2020, because the Bellevue School District is the one who sent him outside the state. Because of the challenging behavior, the school district were not able to provide service. He was not even safe to stay home. He was attacking himself and attacking the family. Many life-threatening incidents were happened. When you think about autistic children, you might think one day they are able to drive a car. You might think one day they are able to go to college. You might think so many progress in the future, but that's not my child. My child is struggling to stay safe next to human, not able to communicate, zero awareness for his surrounding. Let me tell you one story. One day when he was 12 years old, I was walking with him around the beach. That's what he loves. And he likes a string like this to hold on his hand. So he has that. That's his favorite thing, to hold it. So unfortunately, he dropped it in the water. So he was trying to jump on the bridge to get these things. He don't even know what is the consequence. You can imagine how much his brain is affected. Autism is not, it's not enough to describe my son. That's why I always believe. One mom, recently I talked about her incident in home. She told me that he was having hard time with the child behavior in home. He was fighting and he was attacking her. He was attacking himself. And she said, the story makes me really, really heartbreaking. She said, somebody called me while I was on the crisis. And that person said, why don't you close the door until he calmed down? And she said, you know what? People don't even know he's strong enough to break the door. That's how, I don't know how to explain that, his strengths. So that's what it is. And actually he does. He broke the door and he was breaking out and out from the room. So that's how our kids are suffering. Right now, I really appreciate the facility taking care of him, Heart Spring, because safety was a big concern for the family and for Lul. Believe it or not, even right now, when he get upset, to calm Lul down, at least 6 adults needed. At least 6 huge, physically able to control people around Lul to keep him safe, not to fight for others and not to hurt himself. Bellevue School District don't have any plan to return him back because he has no progress. So it's like more than 2 years he was there. Right now, Bellevue School District has sent 3 children to Hot Spring at the cost of annually a minimum $320,000 in a year. I wonder why that money is not used in Washington to build high care facility. I think that's possible. And I also put the article about sending kids from the state, from Washington state outside the state, which was done February 2022 by investigator Wilson. You can read the story. My story is added on that one. That's on the first page. My story is including that. So imagine sending your child outside the state. What does the feeling look like? It's always hard to explain sending your child far away from where you live. Just think about when you think about to see him, you can't. So much things have done. We have to plan travel. We have to prepare, quit our job, and we have to go and we have to spend time there. And also it costs a lot. The school district provides some, that's not enough for the family bonding. It's not enough. I miss him every single day. Whenever I start thinking about him, my heart always broken. Even when I'm driving, I always cry, just thinking about him, what he's doing. It's not fair. I worried about his future. I've been telling so many stories, even like somebody said, I'm very grateful that I'm able to express myself, to share my story. But I am really worried about the family who doesn't speak English at all, who doesn't know anything about the surrounding. People is suffering in home. They don't know what to do like I do. So autism is not a good description for my son. People has to understand what we are going through. It's very, very challenging. So if he come back home, trust me, right now, it's very impossible to keep him home, very impossible. Even I travel there. So when I travel, the only option I have is driving him around. I can't stop. Stopping is not an option. He's gonna grab me and dragging me, and it's a lot. So he's not gonna stay in my hotel. He wanna go like within 5 minutes. He wanna out. So what's gonna happen when he come back? What kind of plan is gonna happen for him? I'm not sure. Anyways, thank you so much for all you do, guys. I really appreciate your time and effort. I'm always available to do anything possible for my kids and for special need family and kids. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And just reminding that there's so much more barriers to that bulb, especially the language barriers and the travel time, the expenses. That's a lot just to see your child who's somewhere else far away, and just so you could see them. I'm sorry you have to go through that in your family, and I'm sorry that we don't get much choices. It's like we're darned if we do and we're darned if we don't. That's really how it feels. And I'm sorry Mara said it, but thank you for sharing. Anyways, we're gonna move on to Katie Bateman. She's a certified behavior therapist. Thank you for all the speakers so far and everyone's patience. I really appreciate it. I know this is heavy. All right, take it away, Katie.
Thank you so much. Before I start, I just want to say thank you for having me, and that I am sending so many hugs to so many people on this call. My name is Katie Bateman, and I am a behavior analyst. So I'm a board certified behavior analyst doctoral. And I work with a lot of certified behavior technicians in serving our state. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what those services can look like for adults and then adults in crisis. And I'll talk about some of the work that I've done at the University of Washington and at the Herring Center to really think about how do we provide support to families and caregivers that are trying to find services across the state and doing their best and being the best advocates that they can be, which is a full-time job. And that in itself is, you know, you shouldn't have to have a full-time job to advocate for your child. It shouldn't be so hard. So I want to talk a little bit first about what is a board certified behavior analyst, so a BCBA. And so what a BCBA is we are licensed with the Department of Health in the Washington State as LBAs, licensed behavior analysts, and certified CBTs, certified behavior technicians, often work under us. And we work together as a team to think about for individuals with autism and disabilities, what are those areas that are priorities for the families? What are the values of the family? What are the interfering or behaviors that are inhibiting this individual from accessing their environment and accessing moments of joy every day and being part of their community and being in an inclusive spot, and having more access to inclusive settings. And so what we do is really, we talk with families and caregivers and identify what are these priority areas. And then we think about, gosh, what are the strengths of this individual and how do we pull these together to address these areas that we either want to learn more skills in, expand functional communication. We know that behavior is communication. So we want to think about, gosh, like this behavior is really, really hard. What is it communicating? And what does this behavior mean versus just this bad, challenging behavior, right? We want to look beyond that. We don't see that. We are looking at, okay, what is it communicating? What is this individual trying to tell us through this behavior? And what's the function of it? And then we think a lot about, are there other ways for this individual to get that need met so they don't have to engage in that behavior? Certified behavior technicians often work under behavior analysts. So they work together in implementing these plans across the state. For adults with disabilities, it could look like job coaching. It could look like daily living skills. It could be work on, I worked on going on the bus with an individual to be able to increase access to community settings. For individuals in crisis, a lot of times it's work with other providers. We're working with other disciplines to think of holistically, as we do with individuals who are not in crisis, but we really want to think about what are these behaviors that are happening right now that we can get down to a stable baseline and work together to do that so that we can then address what do we need to work on so that this individual has access to a moment of joy every day. Oftentimes that's functional communication training. Behavior is communication. So thinking about how do we make sure that this individual can communicate in a modality that works for them. We do a lot of work with parents and caregivers and thinking about what do they need and what information do they need to be able to support their loved one in this journey. When we think about, let me look at my notes real quick, what I want to make sure I don't miss. Another thing that, I want to talk about is I think there's a lot of confusion across not just our state and across the field with applied behavior analysis versus positive behavior supports. And there's a lot of, I can put some literature in the chat box, but positive behavior supports is rooted in applied behavior analysis. And there are folks that you'll read all about this. There are folks that say that there are big differences. There are folks that'll say that this is splitting hairs. I think what's really important when we think about behavior supports is it meeting the need of this individual and their family? Do they feel like they are addressing the values of their family? Is it culturally responsive? Is it meeting this family's needs? I am also a family member of an individual with autism, and I often think about, growing up and having these providers come in and out of your home and how vulnerable that is. And that we have to really make sure as providers that that these families are comfortable with us in their homes. I think, I think about today, if somebody comes over and there's dishes in my sink, I have that thought in my head. And to have somebody in your head every day, in your house every day, how intrusive and vulnerable that is. And it means that as providers and as practitioners, we have to do our best to really make sure that we feel good to these families and that we're a good match, so that it doesn't feel like more of a burden than scheduling and all of that already is. Some of the work I do with families of teens and adults across the state is a parent education course that's around basic principles of behavior and supporting that behavior at home. And what I have found in doing this work is that, you know, there are families where this information is really spot on and what they're looking for in that moment. And there's also families where we are in crisis and we're past that, and talking about reinforcement is not helpful right now. And we need to think about what else do we need to learn to be able to navigate these systems. And so I really began to think about, gosh, when we think about providing these, you know, remote group online parent education courses, there's almost two topic areas. It's navigating the complex systems of the state and the advocacy piece, and what services are available and what's not available, and what we need to do to try to get those services. And this like monopoly map, or chutes and ladders map, that's more complex, you know, it's all over the place, of how to find this complex map of where to go to get these services. And that's been really interesting to think about. You know, we think about so many, I know you all have talked about this, but so many individuals are in the emergency department right now as a residential facility, and that's not sustainable. So thinking about what do we, just like we individualize for individuals with disabilities, we need to think about individualizing settings for adults and places for them to be that meets the needs of a wide ability level, so that individuals have supports that meet their needs and feel good for their family. You know, of course, I think the topic comes up a lot of thinking about, can we train employees at group homes to be CBTs and to hire CBTs? And I think absolutely. But again, we still have some individuals and their families who maybe that's not the best setting for them, and they're working so hard to find a setting. And we need to also have something available for them so that they're not in another state, and that, you know, they have access to seeing their loved one. And, you know, I think a lot about being in the emergency department, and that, you know, these caregivers and families are the people who love their child the most in the world. They are their ultimate cheerleader. They are the people who love them the most, and they don't have the supports they need to be able to provide what their child needs. And that feeling of, you know, this is my child, and they are the person I love them the most, and I don't have what I need to be able to provide them those supports, and they're still in the emergency department. And I think about that a lot. And I think about, I think a lot about being a provider of, I'm a provider with a PhD in behavior analysis and special education. And there are times that I leave settings and my heart is shattered, and that we have to change these services so that families can access what they need. And yes, so I am sending so much love to so many people on this call, and I'm happy to answer any questions about behavior analysis and positive behavior supports that are more in depth. But I think just having access to supports so that we can see a child as a whole and be able to come up with a plan for them to have a quality of life that feels good, and that is a high quality of life, and that a family feels supported, and that everyone is in a place where they're able to access what they need would be an incredible thing for these families across the state and across the world. So, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Katie. That was it's really important to have someone with your experience on here, and just gives and brings a little, and you just brought a little bit of positivity to this. So I appreciate it. All right. Next, we're going to have Diana go over the bills of interest. And then after that, we'll have Jessica from sales speak, and then we'll wrap it up. everybody that's been on here has been troopers, especially the speakers. All right, we'll move forward.
Okay, everybody. I have to say this is one of the most emotional advocacy days that we have done. And to hear all these stories, and they are different from each other, just like our kids are different. There's no two kids the same in their needs. And I'm just very grateful to all the moms and the parents and siblings and nieces that have shared their stories today. And this is recorded and it will be on our website. And you can take short clips out of this to your legislators, share the stories with them. I have the bills of interest up right now. These can be found on our website at arcwa.org. If you hover over advocacy and go to bill tracker, that's this page here. And every week the bills of interest is updated, plus it shows a hearing schedule for the week. And once we get to budget stuff, there'll be another update on that. But the bills of interest, you can look at them, go through them. I think for today, the one that will affect most people is Senate Bill 5506. This is for enhanced behavior support. The bill has evolved as it's gone through. It got a huge fiscal note because, meaning how much it will cost the state to do it, because they were considering doing it as a home and having to build the home and everything around with it. But we changed it, so it's a workforce issue now. We need people trained like Katie as behavioral therapists to work in like supported living homes and group homes and the group training homes. And the SOLAs, the state operated living alternatives. We need staff there who are well trained and can look at these very complex behaviors in each individual. And like Katie Omri said earlier, when her son got those things in the Children's Intensive In-Home Behavior Support waiver, miracles were happening. She was seeing so much positive effect of those services. And then they got taken away. CMS decided it was a medical thing, so it couldn't be included in the waiver anymore. And we lost a lot of providers when that happened too. So Senate Bill 5506, you should all be following that. Sign in pro whenever it's got a hearing. It's going to be up for exec session. So we're working on this bill really hard to try and get trained people in the community who can help our kids. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica.
About bills that are important to you and to set up appointments with them. First, you can email your legislators about bills that are important to you and to set up appointments with them. You can also watch legislative action on TVW at www.tvw.org. You can sign in to testify at future hearings. You can sign in pro, or submit written testimony on a bill. Let me show you how it works. Go to www.leg.wa.gov and scroll down to let your voice be heard. Click on participating in the process, then click on testifying in a virtual hearing. Choose House or Senate, depending on which committee you want to testify at. We'll look at a House bill today. Select the House button. Then for this morning, let's look at the House Appropriations. Choose the date and time of the hearing. The hearing is today, February 22nd, 2023 at 1:30. Then click the circle for HB 1134. Then select the type of testimony you want to give. You can do live testimony virtually via Zoom, or you can just sign in with your position on the bill. If you want to, you can submit written testimony. Today we will sign in to testify. Choose your position on the bill, pro, con, or other. Fill out the form with your name, email, full address, and phone number. If your name is hard to pronounce, you can sound it out in the pronunciation box. If your name is easy to pronounce, don't worry about filling out that box. Usually you will be testifying as an individual, but if you are part of a panel, you would enter your name and info as a new panelist, then add each person's info who will be on the panel after that. Finally, select I am not a robot. After you submit the registration form, an email will be sent to you with Zoom link information. Once you get the email, it has links to add it to your Outlook, Google, or Yahoo calendar. Advocacy Day is a project of the ARC of Washington State and funded by the Washington State Developmental Disabilities Council. Be sure to join us for future advocacy days. Register for each advocacy day on our website at www.arcwa.org/advocacy-ds. We want to make sure you are satisfied with advocacy days, so be sure to fill out our feedback form. Your feedback helps us to continue improving and helping your voice to be heard. Let's walk through it together. Start at arcwa.org/advocacy days. Scroll down to the 3 smiley faces that say your feedback matters, and then select click here. The link to the feedback form in Spanish is right below the link to the English version. Start by putting in your email address. Next, you select the date and topic of the advocacy day you're giving input for. You can then let us know if this is your first advocacy day or not. Next, you can answer 4 short questions by just picking the smiley faces that answer how you feel about the virtual advocacy day. Then you submit the form, just as simple as that. Your input helps the ARC to know what you like, what you don't like, what is helpful, and what is not helpful. You can learn about these and more ideas to get involved on our website at www.arcwa.org and click on Advocacy Days. You can also contact us at sale@arcwa.org or Diana@arcwa.org if you need help. Are there any questions?
Yeah, that's good. When you submit a written testimony, does it matter how the length of the written testimony is? They give you a number of characters to use. I think it's like a certain number, and then you just fill out like what you want to say and submit it.
Yeah, and there's actually, this is Stacy, there's a limit to how many characters you can have. So it'll limit you, but you get quite a bit, you can get quite a bit in there. So just go for it, and when it stops you, then you can start to edit before you hit send.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought. Thanks.
All right, everybody. We're gonna end our advocacy days here. We're behind schedule, but I think we can all understand why. So we'll hope to see you for the next advocacy days next week, and we hope after today you guys just go home and take care of yourself however you see fit, and but it's definitely needed today. So go and recover, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. You've done a great job with all this emotional stuff today.
Thank you. I almost like asked you to take over, honestly, because I was pretty close to falling apart.
And I also put my offer in as well, so.
You